All right, will you open up your Bibles with me to the New Testament book of 2 Timothy? If you need the Bible, there's some men coming forward right now, and they will love to hand you a copy. You know, one of the things that Scripture does so beautifully, so wonderfully, is that it regularly gives us human illustrations to help us understand who God is. Where our finite minds cannot understand an infinite God, Scripture gives us language and illustrations to help us understand, from our understanding, our perspective, who God is and how we are to be in relationship with Him. Well, one of my favorite visuals, in fact, we just sang about this visual, comes from the book of Isaiah, in helping us to understand that God is the creator, that God is the initiator in your life, that God is the one who is at work in your life. The prophet Isaiah wrote these words, "But now, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay. You are our potter. We are all the work of your hand." You know, when I think about a potter, my mind takes me back to my high school art classes, in which it seemed like we were regularly working with clay. And in particular, it seems like we were regularly having an opportunity to work with clay on a potter's wheel. And one of the things I remember when trying to mold and shape clay on a potter's wheel is that it requires lots of focus, or else that clay starts spinning out of control and does things you didn't want it to do. That as you're working with that clay on that wheel, it requires patience. It can't be urgent to just get this thing made. It requires a gentleness, because it was amazing how quickly one little pressure somewhere changes the whole shape of this thing. It requires a gentleness. It also required a willingness to get messy. This was not something I could do detached. This was something that I was going to be in it. I was going to get my hands all full of wet clay, and sometimes my face would get full of clay. And I mean, this wasn't something I could do casually. I had to be fully committed. And so when I hear that God is our potter, there's just a very distinctive image that automatically comes to my mind. I have the image of a God being incredibly intimate with this clay, a God being very personal, God being very careful as God is at work in my life. I love that image. I also think that if I am the clay, my role is pretty simple. I simply make myself available for God to shape me and mold me in however He desires to do that. The pressure's off of me. It's the work of the potter. You know, that image of the potter and the clay has always stayed with me. And sometimes when I think that God is distant, or that I think God is not at work in my life, I'm reminded of those words from Isaiah. I'm reminded of that analogy, and I say, no, God is my potter. He is intimately at work in my life. And He is purposely and gently creating in me His purposes for His glory. That's the beauty of the human analogy, is that it helps us to understand the complexities of God in the way that connects to our human experience. So we say, oh, I understand, God, what you're wanting me to know. You are the one who is shaping me and creating me and forming me, just like a potter forms a pot. The beauty of those images is that now I know God more deeply. And I get to respond to God more personally. Thank you, God, that you are my potter. Thank you, God, that I am the work of your hands. Well, as we continue our study in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 2, the Apostle Paul, the author of this book, is going to use three images, three illustrations, three analogies of a soldier, of an athlete, and a farmer. And he's going to use these images to help young Timothy, the pastor who he's writing to understand what it means to truly follow Jesus. And Paul uses these three images to help him, therefore helping us to have a right definition, a right understanding of what it means to enter into the work of Christ, and more specifically in the context of this passage, to understand what it means to endure the suffering that comes with the work of Christ. You see, sometimes we can develop our own definition of what it means to be involved in the work of Christ. We can develop our own understanding of what it means to endure sufferings with Christ, and sometimes our own definition gives us a wrong understanding of what it truly means to follow Christ. And what can happen is, out of that wrong definition, that wrong understanding, we can actually find ourselves moving away from or running away from the very things that God has called us into. And so just like the challenges of life can cause us to develop a perception that God is distant, apparently God has abandoned me, apparently God has left me, and Scripture says, no, the Lord is a potter. He is intimately at work in your life. Our own desire for comfort in this world can cause us to redefine what does it truly mean to be a follower of Jesus and to enter into his work. And so Paul is going to give us three images: the soldier, the athlete, and the farmer, to bring clarity, to bring definition into what we have been truly called into. And we're not going to just walk through this in 1 week. In fact, we're going to take one image, one illustration per week, so we can really sit with what Paul is wanting us to grasp when it comes to the work and the role that we have been called into as followers of Jesus. And so would you read with me 2 Timothy chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 1, and then we're going to read through the two verses that we're going to look at today, verses 3 and 4. So 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 1 begins this way: You then, he's speaking to Timothy, you then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Verse 3 continues, share in suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No soldier gets entangled in civilian pursuits, since his aim is to please the one who enlisted him. And so in verse 3, Paul comes back to a theme that he established in chapter 1, the theme of suffering. And just like he said in chapter 1, where he invites Timothy into this suffering, now in chapter 2, verse 3, he asks Timothy to share in this suffering. But he doesn't just say share, does he? No, he connects that suffering with an image that he hopes lodges in Timothy's mind. He says, share in suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. You know, in this world, we will experience suffering, I imagine, in just about every area of our life. And it's not just a Christian thing, right? I mean, you don't need to be a Christian to know the pain and the hardship of this world. Every single person who has walked the surface of this earth at some level has experienced suffering. But in verse 3, Paul is defining the type of suffering that he is inviting Timothy to share. And it's not just the general sufferings that we will all experience at some level in a broken world, but rather, Paul says, it's the suffering that comes as you live out the truth of Christ in this world and as you enter into the work and mission of Christ in this world. It's the suffering that comes from being a soldier of Jesus Christ. That's an interesting image that Paul gives us. The soldier. It can be an uncomfortable image. I mean, I imagine for many of us, we're not looking to become soldiers. I imagine for all of us, we're not looking to enter into a war. And it's easy to read verse 3 and say, but Paul, I don't want to be a soldier. But Paul wants us to understand is just like there's a cost of being a soldier, there's a cost and a sacrifice to following Jesus. You know, a soldier should not be surprised that when he enlists, they automatically send him to boot camp. A soldier should not be surprised that he may, at some point in his time in active duty, find himself in a war zone, because that is what a soldier is sometimes called to do. In the same way, a Christian should not be surprised that as we walk in the truth of Christ and we enter into the mission of Christ, that we will experience the sufferings and the persecutions that come with it. But sometimes it does surprise us, right? I didn't realize it was going to be like that. I didn't realize they were going to sprung like that. I didn't know that I was going to experience those sufferings simply trying to walk in obedience to Jesus. Paul wrote these words to Christians who were experiencing persecution. He said, "Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going through, as if something strange were happening to you. Instead, be very glad, for these trials make you partners with Christ in his suffering." You know, one of the challenges of the modern day Christian, or even just modern day Christianity, is that we promote the joy of eternal life. And we promote the joy of fellowship within the body, but we do not promote the cost of true discipleship. And we have produced a Christianity that does not understand that to follow Christ is to enter into the work of Christ, and that to follow Christ is to share in the sufferings of Christ. One writer noted, too often Christianity is presented to non-believers as the cure to all anxieties, difficulties, and trials. And the so-called gospel can result in false disciples or false expectations. Timothy may have been thinking, I didn't realize it was going to be like this. I didn't realize I was going to experience suffering when I walked in the truth of Christ. And Paul is reminding Timothy that as a disciple of Jesus, you are in a spiritual battle that will produce fiery trials. And Paul is saying, I want to remind you that as a disciple of Jesus, you are a soldier for the sake of the gospel. You know, if Timothy thought these trials were not a part of the job description, I don't remember seeing this when I signed up. Paul is reminding Timothy of an image. You're a soldier. You are a soldier, Timothy. And you're an enlisted soldier. You're an active duty soldier. And yes, Timothy, there is a cost to being a follower of Jesus. There is a sacrifice to following Jesus. And just like it's not strange that a soldier may find themselves in battle, it should not be strange that a Christian will face suffering and persecution for the sake of the gospel. Paul's not just using this soldier imagery to tell Timothy that he may experience suffering or that he will experience suffering, but I think there's actually a greater point that Paul is actually wanting to make when he brings this image of a soldier, and he wants to plant this image of a soldier in Timothy's mind, that he wants to remind him that as a Christian, we live differently. Verse 4. No soldier gets entangled in civilian pursuits, since his aim is to please the one who enlisted him. Paul's making a distinction here between an active duty soldier and a non-active duty civilian. And he says there's a very different way that both of these people live, act, think. A civilian has the freedom to focus on themselves. I mean, the civilian gets to focus on raising a family and running a business and building a career and going to school and enjoying the leisure activities like movies and concerts and sports and other entertainment. The civilian can be concerned with community activities and local and national politics. They have the freedom to live where they want and work where they want. That's the freedom of the civilian, but not the soldier. The soldier lives and thinks differently. They are under orders. They're under orders of their commanding officer. They live and work according to their commanding officer. Their time and really their life is not their own. My wife, Ann, grew up the daughter of a colonel in the United States Army, which meant she lived wherever the military assigned her dad to work and live. Which means that my wife was born on a military base in Leavenworth, Kansas, went to preschool in Germany, went to elementary in Virginia, went back to Germany for middle school, and then graduated high school in Pennsylvania. And each one of those stops, she is moving somewhere, even in Germany and Virginia and Pennsylvania. She went where her dad went, and her dad went where the one who enlisted him, the military, sent him. Military families don't have the same freedom of choice as a civilian who is not on active duty. When my wife gets asked the question, "Where'd you grow up?" she simply responds, "I grew up military." No more explanation needed. People go, "Oh, all right." Because they know that if you're in military, or if you're part of a military family, you're going to be moving. Your life is not your own. When Paul says the follower of Jesus is like a soldier, he's saying, Christian, the focus of your life is different than the natural rhythm and culture of this world that says, hey, where do you want to live? Hey, what neighborhood do you want to live in? What schools do you want your kids to go to? What activities do you want them to be a part of? What do you want to do for a living? No, as a soldier, you live and act differently. You can't just simply follow your own desires and pursuits. You live according to the one who has enlisted you. As Christians, we are active duty soldiers in the battle for the souls of men. When we make that commitment to follow Jesus, it wasn't just a morality shift. He commissions us now to go. There's work that I'm calling you into. To go and to make disciples who will then make disciples. We are been given our orders, if you will. And just as the soldier lives with a different focus, you and I must live with a different focus. We must live with the kingdom of God focus, a mission of Christ focus. But here's the challenge, is that we live in a culture in which everything is built around the civilian values. We live in a culture that says life is about raising your family. That's the ultimate pursuit. Life is about building a career. Life is about pursuing your dreams, leaving a legacy, and those things are often in conflict with the sufferings that we are called into. And so as we're pursuing the things of this world, but we're stepping into the sufferings of Christ, now there's a conflict. And you can find yourself praying the prayer that I have prayed. Oh God, why does this have to be so hard? Can't I just have a normal life and raise a normal family and just have a nice safe job and just have a nice safe reputation, just have a nice safe place to live? Why do I have to have all the other stuff? Paul's making a very pointed statement in verse 4. Christian, you're not a civilian. You're not a civilian. This life is not for your pleasure. to do with it whatever you want to do with it. This life isn't trying to build the best life we can build so we can leave a legacy for the next generation. The life isn't just to live the life to the fullest before I die. Our families aren't the ultimate goal. Our jobs aren't the ultimate goal. Leaving the world a better place isn't the ultimate goal. We have become called to be a people whose pursuit alone is Christ. And it may require the sacrifice of our own life for the sake of the gospel. Or to put it in a more personal way, it may require the sacrifice of our job. It may require the sacrifice of our home. It may require the sacrifice of living near family. It may require the sacrifice of a certain lifestyle that we desire. It may require the sacrifice of our freedoms, our dreams, our safety, our comfort. Paul has given us a challenging image. It's the image of an enlisted active duty soldier. And the purpose is to bring definition and clarity to what it means to live the Christian life. You must live in obedience to the one who has enlisted you. But here's the challenge of this image that we're being reminded of. The challenge is to grasp the reality that Paul is saying something. Your life is not your own. You know what my wife would have preferred? My wife would have preferred to grow up in one town, in one home, in one church, in one school, with one group of friends. I don't say that flippantly. I say that what she would have loved. And not to be moved every 2 years. And to be the new kid, new school, new church. But her dad was living life pleasing the one who enlisted him. You and I are on active duty for the sake of Christ. And one of the realities of that is our life is not our own. And it's not free to be spent on our time any way we want. We are to obey. And we are to please the one who has enlisted us. And there and only there do we know joy and peace and the satisfaction of walking in obedience to the one who has enlisted us and saved us and forgiven us. You know, we can look at this illustration from verse 4 and we can find ourselves saying, well, it sounds like he's telling us that we have to give up everything to follow Jesus. And that's exactly what Paul is saying. That when Jesus called us into a relationship with him, he calls us with this invitation, take up your cross, meaning lay down your own life, give up your own life, and follow me. Make your life my life. Paul's saying, Christian, you're not a civilian. You know, this statement from Paul should cause us to ask a significant question. So what does it mean to please the one who has enlisted us? Well, what is God calling us to do as a soldier of Christ? Well, to understand the active work of a Christian soldier, all we have to do is go back to verse 2, in which Paul tells Timothy, and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Last week we said this is a picture of discipleship. We go and produce disciples of Jesus who now will go and produce disciples of Jesus, who they will now go and produce disciples of Jesus. We have the privilege and joy of living out this great commission to go and to make disciples and then teach them to obey all that Christ has commanded. This is what we have been enlisted to do as we delight in God. But as Paul recognizes, and the reason he writes these words from Timothy is that we can get distracted. We can get pulled into the affairs of the civilian world. Which is why Paul is using this soldier imagery, and he says, That's not who you are. That's not what you're giving your life to. That's not what you're about. Your days should not be spent pursuing whatever you want to pursue. This is why Paul writes in Galatians 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live in the body, mean in this present world, I simply live by faith in the Son of God. I simply live trying to please the one who has called me into relationship with Him, following Him into His work, into His mission. You know, if we truly sit with verses 3 and 4, and we let these words just sit on us, if we let them convict us, it should cause us to ask the reflecting question, do I live as one who seeks to please the one who has enlisted me? Or have I made my life my own? Or am I trying to do some weird dance where I am both a soldier and a civilian? A good way to answer that question is to look at what you have given your life to. How you're spending your time, how you spend your resources, how you spend your energy. Are they being used in obedience to God as you daily surrender your life to Him? Or are they simply being used to build a safe and a comfortable life? Another way to answer that question is my life producing disciples who make disciples? You know, too often the work of the Christian gets summed up in church activity. Well, of course I am. I'm serving in this ministry. I'm involved in this thing at the church. And we can declare ourselves on mission because we teach Sunday school, or we lead a small group, or we serve as an elder or a deacon. And those things can certainly be ministries that you're involved in when you are involved in the work of Christ. But that activity alone and that title alone doesn't mean that you are living out the mission of Christ. And when you are on mission for Christ, your work becomes far more than a church activity or a title. In fact, your reputation is far more than a ministry leader. You are known as one who proclaims the hope and the truth of Christ. You are known as one who is making disciples who are making disciples. I think one of the greatest challenges for the church today is that we have created a Christian lifestyle that we believe is a life on mission when often is simply a life of religious activities. And we look at our calendar and we see our family activities and our work activities and our church activities, and the work of the gospel becomes just another activity that fits into our schedule, and we're straddling that life between soldier and civilian, and we have conflicting orders and conflicting allegiances. You know, you never mistake a soldier in battle for a civilian raising a family. In the same way, we should never mistake a Christian soldier for someone who is not engaged in the work of the gospel. And yet we've created a version of a Christian soldier that looks just like a civilian, and no one is questioning why that soldier on the battlefield is lying in that hammock. Paul's saying to Timothy, put the image of the soldier in your mind. Let that shape how you follow Jesus. Not so that Timothy begins to pursue life in an aggressive way, looking for battles, but so that Timothy begins to live life with a focus, aiming to please the one who has enlisted him. You know, it is easy. It is easy to be a Christian living a civilian life. In fact, here's the requirements. Do nothing. But to live as an active duty Christian for the sake of the gospel, it requires a discipline. It requires the focus of a soldier. It requires living life on mission and purpose. It requires not settling for Christian activities or the business of Christian ministries, but the intentional life that is committed to the pursuit of making disciples who are making disciples who will make disciples. Are we living our life on our own? Are we living in response to what God has called us to as He listed us into following Him for the sake of the gospel? You know, if you have found yourself living that civilian life, and we all have, I mean, we all have. And it may be a daily challenge to say, whoa, I've given my day to the things not of the kingdom. If you find yourself living that civilian life, may Paul's word exhort us. It's time to re-engage. It's time to come for Christ, the one who has enlisted us, and say, I'm yours. I'm yours. Use my life however you want to use it, because you're the potter. You're the potter. And you have an idea for what my life should look like, and you're the one sitting at the potter's wheel, and you're the one forming and molding. Let me recognize that I am simply your clay for your purposes. Are we living our life on our own? Or do we get to know the joy of living for the one who has enlisted us? Let me pray. Father, I struggle with the image of a soldier because I don't want to live the life of a soldier. I don't want the suffering and the sacrifice that comes from one who lists themselves. But God, you have called us into your work. You've called us into the suffering that comes in that work. And Paul says in verse 1 of chapter 2 that we get to be strengthened by the grace of Christ as we enter into that work. We don't do it alone. Paul says that your grace is sufficient to carry us through that work. Your Son says, I'll never leave you in that work. But God, may we recognize that you have given us that work. God, I confess how easy it is to desire the civilian life. God, I don't want the trials. I don't want the pain. I don't want the suffering. And yet that's where my joy is. To be walking in obedience to you. To delight in you. To live a life fully given to the one who knit me together in my mother's womb, who in an intimate and gentle and purposeful way sculpted my life like a potter, shaping a pot. I'm yours. God, let me not jump off that wheel and say, I have a different idea for what I should look like and what I should do and how I should be used. But God, let me come onto that potter's wheel with joy, saying, the very creator of this world, mold me, shape me, use me. Let me be used for your purposes and your glory. God, may we not run from what you have called us to do and who you've called us to be. Oh God, we are yours. And may we walk in obedience to you. Amen.